Thank you for the very nice introduction, and good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be here, and I also want to thank the Canadian government, of course, Anouk and Dietrich, that made it possible for us to organize kind of a whole week. I really look forward. It's my first day here. The whole week here in Holland and then in Belgium, we look at what's happening in sustainable building here, which is always very interesting for me. I wanted to take, we don't have a lot of time today, and the challenge is always, in Canada, there's now a very rich story to tell about sustainable building. And so it's always, what should I pick to share with you with maybe a little bit unique about Canada. And in terms of the climate, it's in Vancouver, where I live on the west coast, the climate is like this here. We don't get hardly any snow. But then you go to Winnipeg in Manitoba, and it's minus 30 in the winter and plus 30 in the summer. And you go to Ontario, high humidity, so we have a really different climate zone, so that really affects how we build. But I wanted to give you a bit of an overview, and maybe we'll close that curtain too, then we can see the slides a little bit better, if that works. Yeah. You get a little bit better of the pictures. The Canada Green Building Council, and this is something very important I wanted to tell you, is that most of the green building efforts in Canada and the Canada Green Building Council are driven by the private sector. We have not, we do have government involvement, particularly from cities and from the provinces, but not so much from the federal government. And so there are some policies around green building that I will share with you, but most of the initiatives in Canada is driven by the private sector. So when we go out as the council, our membership, our board of directors, it's for the majority made up from the building industry, from senior representatives from the building industry that have built a business case around sustainable building for commercial projects, for residential projects, for community projects. So that is the main driver of green building in Canada, which I understand. I've grown up in Germany, and I go there quite still regularly. The government involvement in Germany, at least, in the EU is very, very high. So that's the main difference. What you see today is really how the private sector has been really engaged around green building and how. The council is 10 years old. We were founded in 2002. This is a report. You can go to our website. You can download this. We have our annual reports on there. Over the last 10 to 12 years, we had a very rapid growth and uptake of green building. Before the council arrived, there wasn't much around green building happening in Canada. And the council was able, through its stakeholders, to bring these different parties together. So the council is what we call a cross-sectoral. So we have architects and engineers and manufacturers and developers and landlords and all these different groups that are involved in creating buildings and communities to be part of the council. So we are cross-sectoral and very integrated, which is very important in driving sustainable building forward. Our motto is to make every building greener. And the every building greener is that you can build new buildings to very high performance levels, but there's so many existing buildings, and if you improve them by 10 or 20%, that's good too. Because eventually our future in which regards to climate and environmental quality will be determined what we do with the existing building stock on a larger scale. And as we all know, if you go down into commercial buildings, it becomes more and more difficult from an economic point of view, which is the driver in Canada. It becomes very difficult. Once you get to houses, it becomes even more difficult. A main driver, and again, it leads back to kind of this private sector initiative. And I know here in Holland, you probably use BREEAM, I would assume, as a rating tool. In North America, it's LEED. And it's actually the combination of LEED as a rating tool that has been constructed not just talk about energy efficiency, but to talk about all in a holistic way about buildings, has been instrumental to really drive green building forward. So if I can compare that in Europe, perhaps they say it's the legislation out of Brussels and national regulations around building performance that determine what you need to build. In North America, it's LEED. LEED will determine how buildings are being built for the large part. We have codes, but the codes don't follow. LEED is leading the market, and then the codes come up to bring the whole market up, but it's not the other way around. So LEED has been crucial, and the success of LEED, it came around in about 2000, it really took off, is that it provided particularly, we started off with architects. Architects were really the founding group of professionals that founded the council initially. It provided kind of a common language on what a green building actually constitutes. So not just energy efficiency, but quality, the indoor quality, water, the site, where the building is located, all is a very integrated way of looking at buildings. And the whole idea is that we are kind of here, and these are the different levels of certification. I don't want to get into that, but the whole idea is that LEED provides a path of continuous improvement over time, and that the codes actually are starting to, green building codes will actually, what we do today will become code into the future. So we're constantly pulling up the market to higher and higher performance that goes to kind of zero impact, call it carbon neutral or net zero, and you go above that, so that you get into a territory where you then talk about, at least in Canada, where you talk about net positive buildings or regenerative buildings. So buildings that give back to the environment rather than drawing on it. So this is kind of that's the vision behind LEED. In terms of our uptake, Canada is a large country in terms of its land mass, but it's a small country in terms of its population. We only have 38 million people, and they are about 70 to 80% of those 38 million people live in cities. So you have when you have 10 large cities, so you have a lot of wilderness, empty space in between those cities. And so what happens in cities in our urbanized area is very important for Canada. The uptake has been of LEED has been very, very good. We have about 75 million square meters now of projects that are either registered or they're certified under the LEED program. In the council, we do all of that. We do the full certification. We set the standards with the US. We do that. So in Canada now, you cannot, if you build a Class A office building in Canada, it will not be built without LEED certification. A government body, be it federal government, provincial, local government, they will not build a building to either have it certified to LEED or have it built to some kind of green building standard. So it's very pervasive now about institutions, government, and particularly the private sector. You can see when we started off, it was all government. So it was the federal government of Canada, actually in 2006, put in a policy in saying all our buildings, our own buildings, the real property buildings have to be LEED Gold certified over a certain size. Then the city started doing it, then the provinces started to do that. So that made up the initial kind of wave and provided the impetus. And then about 2 or 3 years in, it was the private sector that started now. And now, 10 years later, 12 years later, the private sector is actually taken over. So it's the private sector now, for the most part, that leads green building in Canada. And 41% of all projects are private sector projects. And that includes everything from office buildings to high-rise residential towers to retail buildings like big box retail. It's becoming very, very pervasive. And LEED's become international. When we adopted LEED in 2004 officially, so we took LEED, we adapted it to Canada, to our standards and our climate. When that started, we were the only country that adopted LEED. Now LEED is in 146 countries. It's been used in 146 countries, so it has become de facto the international standard for green building. Not for all building types, but for larger projects, it's become the de facto standard. And it speaks to the adaptability, to the flexibility and the thoughtfulness that's been put into LEED. In the latest version of LEED that just came out, LEED version 4, which raises all kinds of thresholds, the US collected 22,000 comments from around the world, including us, to shape that standard before they put it out. It took them 3 to 4 years to take it out into the marketplace. I don't think there's any green building standard at this time that was that much investment and thoughtfulness put into than LEED at this point. So, but it's very much a private sector standard, right? So it's not something that's been developed necessarily for government. It's been developed for private sector adoption. Canada is, in the world, Canada is number 2. And we have the same in terms of per capita. We have the same adoption as the US. So we have the same uptake in Canada just because, well, US has 10 times the population that we do. And it's become internationalized. So you look at the World Green Building Council, and Anki mentioned that I'm on the board of the World Green Building Council. The idea of green buildings, so this kind of holistic approach to green building, when I joined the World Green Building Council, maybe 10, 15 councils, now there are 98 councils around the world. Pretty much country has a council. And the councils, for the most part, are also based on those principles of market-based solutions. So the private sector, with good government, supported by good government policy, providing the solutions to sustainable building. And the idea behind it is that when the business sector has figured out to do this, it will be adopted very quickly, and it will be the market penetration will be very large. And we're starting to see that happen now. And it's fascinating to observe it, because when we founded the council, we never thought that we have 4,000 or 5,000 buildings now or something like that. We never thought it would happen voluntarily. There's a report that you can download from the World Green Building Council website. It was done by McGraw-Hill. It talks about the green building trends. So you can see over the years, in 2007, there were 26 councils, now there are 98 councils in various stages of their development. So the green ones are the established councils like Dutch GBC, Canada GBC, US GBC, and so on. But it's really has huge uptake. All have the different rating systems and the different practices and standards. But the core idea is the same. And the green activity is on the rise. So you can see that this was a study, they've done this study a couple of times. 3 years ago, green projects made only up like 63% of the respondents thought, green buildings only makes up 1 to 15% of their projects. In 2012, they had dropped to 32, and in 3 years, they were projecting only be 12%. Because what's happening is, the other part is that the green business in architectural firms, and construction firms, and development firms, this is global figures. Construction, green building makes up more and more of their business. And you know how green building is one of the largest industries in the world, with one of the largest environmental footprint. So in terms of a business opportunity, and in terms of reducing environmental impact at the same time, it's a huge opportunity that we're seeing emerging here. In Canada, we have like I said, we have a very cold country, so our energy use is significant. And I can tell you, the existing building stock is not very efficient. So if you look at, let's say, commercial office buildings, and you look at energy consumption in those buildings, it's probably about, I have to think about it in terms of square meters. It would probably be about 300 kilowatt hours per square meter, the average. So 30 per square foot, roughly. The newer buildings, LEED buildings, they probably get down to about 10. They got maybe down, so there's a significant improvement.